Welcome Year 3 to take 3 of Wednesday's math lesson. Unless it's a terrible mistake, I'm not starting again. So, today is the final part of our fractions learning we've been doing for the last 3 weeks. And you've done some super learning where you've gone from learning what half is, started simple, just recapping the Year 2 work, until now you can work out equivalent fractions. And in the deepening section of today's lesson, you're going to get to really show off, choose the question you're going to answer, and show just how well you've done with your fraction work over the last few weeks. So I'm about to take you to the PowerPoint presentation. Today, in our equivalent fractions, we're not going to use the fraction wall, other than just to double check a few things. We're going to be looking for patterns in the numbers to help us work out the equivalent fraction. Just go to share. Hopefully the right slide, not reteaching Tuesday. And that's just what I just did Tuesday, we don't need to hold on that. So just to remind you how fraction rule can be useful. If you look on here, we can see some of the fractions that are the same. So we can see that 1/2 is the same as having 2/4, or that 1/3 lines up with 2/6. And so the relationship between the numbers, halves to quarters, jumped onto the next slide, which is where we're going anyway. We've just looked at that slide, and 1/2 is the same as 2/4. I'll just let you have a look at that for a moment and pause it, see if you can spot any patterns in the numbers. Apart from the strange bit with the 20 thread on the end, that doesn't fit the pattern. What did you see? Did you see any patterns? Well, the bottom seems to be going up in twos, doesn't it? We've got 2, 4, 6, 8. So what do you think this missing number might be here? On the top it's going 1, 2, we've got 4 here. Just looking at the patterns, what do you think this number should be? Hopefully you said 3, because it would follow the pattern 1, 2, 3, 4 on the bottom and 2, 4, 6, 8 at the bottom. I think I just said the bottom there, I should have said the top. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the top, 2, 4, 6, 8 on the bottom. Now, without necessarily spotting that pattern, though, I might have been able to work out the equivalent fraction, because what are all these fractions the equivalent of? Well, they're all equivalent of a half, because that's at the start. So 1 is half of 2. 2 is half of 4. What number is half of 6? 3. And 4 is half of 8. So to be an equivalent fraction, the top number of a half, the top number is always half of the bottom number. So I wonder what number, now we've stretched the pattern and we've also looked at the relationship between the two numbers, you think would go where I'm wiggling the cursor here. What number would go on top of 20 to be another equivalent fraction? You're quite right. It would be 10, because 10 is half of 20. 20ths are not a fraction you talk about very often, but 10 20ths is exactly the same as a half, because you've got half of the 20ths. You might want to come back to this slide and you'll deepen it for some view if that's the level of question you're going to answer. So we're looking for patterns in the numbers. Now, this practice is, I'm just going to give you a little bit of teaching first. So we see if there's a pattern. The top seems to be going up in ones. I can't quite spot the pattern with the bottom numbers, but all the fractions we do have got to be equivalent to a quarter. So we've got 1/4 is the same as, same here, 2/8. Okay, I wonder if it's 3 somethings and how many 16ths. Now, have a go at that question on your own first and see if you can talk with the adults and spot the patterns of what a quarter of a number might be. If you remember, go back to the first one, 1 was 1/4 of 4, 2 is 1/4 of 8. But if you're not sure, in a moment, I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to explain how we've answered this one with my fraction, what I've got drawn on the board. Have a go first. Okay, and pause the sharing. Okay, so it said, let's have a look, 1/4 is the same as 2 eighths, which is the same as 3 something, and the same as so many 16ths. Oh, that's on the side of the board. You can't see that. Let me just turn that around a bit. There you go. Okay. So let's have, can you see my fraction rule now? We'll come back to that in a minute. So 1/4 is the same as 2 eighths. Each quarter has been split into 2 pieces, so the denominator doubles. Because if we've got 4 pieces and everyone's been doubled by being cut in half, we end up with eighths. So we're going to do the end bit first. We're going to go to 6. No, we're not. We're going to go to the next bit, which says 3 somethings. Right, so if each quarter is split into 3 bits, 1, 2, 3. It doesn't line up with the eighths. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I've got 3, and then another 3 is 6, another 3 is 9, another 3 is 12. So if each quarter is broken into 3 pieces, altogether I'm going to have 12. So 3 twelfths. And 3 is a quarter of 12. The final one, which is 16ths. Oh, well, I know 8 doubled is 16. So if every 8 is cut in half, we would end up with 16 pieces altogether. 16 sixteenths make a whole. But I'm not going to cut them all in half. I'll put the space won't take long. So you can see what 16ths look like. Each quarter has been doubled, so we end up with eighths, and then cut each eighth in half, and the bottom row we end up with 16ths. So we want to know how many 16ths is the same as a quarter. So we've got 1/4 here. Let's look down. That line there lines them all up on our fraction rule. So we've got 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16. So 4/16 is the same as having 1/4, and that's because 4 is a quarter of 16. Okay. And you know what I said about a terrible mistake? Some of you have been shouting at the screen for ages because I've written on the board. What have I done wrong? 1/2 is the same as 2 eighths. This is what happens when you're on the third take. 1/4 is the same as 2 eighths, which is the same as 3 twelfths, which is the same as 4/16. I do that all the time in the class, and you just shout at me and tell me at the point. Unfortunately, it went a little bit too far into the video, but there you go. Right. That's why it's always worth going back and checking your work, checking what you've actually written, because otherwise sometimes it makes it incorrect. Right, let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation then for today's lesson. I'm going to go back to sharing. So 1/4 is 2 eighths, is 3 twelfths, is 4/16. That was your practice it. Okay. Move on to the next one. Now the next do it. Can you spot a pattern in the numbers to help you work out the equivalent fractions? 2/3 is the same as something 6 and 6 somethings and 8 twelfths. But instead of having 1/3, we've got 2 pieces out of 3. So if we double this number, I wonder what we might do to the top number. Or you could draw 2/3 like I have on my fraction rule, and then cut each third into 6, and then see how many of the 6 you've actually got. If you've got 2/3 worth. Okay, pause this after you've done it, and I'll give you the answer. Okay, how did you do with the first do it? 2/3 is the same as, quite right, 3/6, and we're going up. Not 3/6, really is tiring. What did you do to the bottom? You doubled the bottom, so we need to double the top. So 2/3 is the same as 4/6, and it's the same as 6. Let's have a look at the bottom. 3, 6. We're going up to 3s. 3, 6, 9. So 6/9 is the same as 2/3. Because 6 is 2/3 of 9, 1/3 of 9 is 3, 2/3 is 6. And that's the same as 8/12. 1/3 of 12 would be 4, 2/3 are 8. So you really am going to try not to make a mistake on the next slide. Right. The next do it. Look for the patterns, and then pause it, and I'll do my best to explain without a mistake afterwards. Okay, are you ready? I wonder what patterns you spotted. The bottom is going up in 5s. So I'm guessing this number might be, what did you say? 20. Good, I'm glad you said that. That's sort of the number I was coming up with. So, but 4/5, tricky. So 1/5 of 5 would be 1, but 4/5 is 4 out of every 5. So if we double the bottom and now we've got tenths, each one of those fifths will be worth 1, it will be worth 2. So we would end up with 8/10. So the top is going up in 4s. 4, 8, 12, 16. The bottom is going 5, 10, 15, 20. This is where your tables come in handy again. You're spotting the relationship between the numbers. Tricky. I think this might be a touch easier. It says, can you use the digit cards to make an equivalent fraction? So you don't use all the digit cards. You just need to use 2 of them. Imagine they were on top of each other to make an equivalent fraction to a half. I think some of you have spotted that quite quickly already. So 3/5 isn't the same, is it? Or 4/5 isn't the same. What's the equivalent fraction, the one that you learned several weeks ago for half? Yeah, you should have put 2/4, which is 2/4. Next one might be a little trickier. You're looking for 2 numbers that show a quarter. Think it. Have a go. Pause it. What did you come up with? Yeah, 1 is a quarter of 4, and 3 is a quarter of 12. Correct. 3/12. I'm not sure my brain would be very good at this deep today, all the mistakes I've made along the way, but let's see how you get on with it. It says, now is your chance to show off how well all your fraction knowledge has come together. If you would like to, choose which question you feel most confident with. So there are 3 questions on here. It says, choose your own denominators. Remember what that meant? At the bottom. And write some fractions that are equivalent to a half. If you think back, we did 10/20ths for the same as a half, didn't we? So you could maybe have a go at doing some fractions at the same as a half. Or if you fancy challenge yourself a little bit more, you could choose your own denominators and write some of their fractions that are equivalent to a quarter. That's where the top number is always a quarter of the bottom number. And then finally, if you want to choose option 3, you have to do option 2 first, really, to be able to do it. Could you find some equivalent fractions that are the same as 3/4? Now, I know your teachers will be really impressed with how much you decide to show off with your deep in it. Don't worry if this sounds like a really hard question. This is just giving some of the children an opportunity to show quite how much they've understood. That might be all. This is the end of our fraction unit for now. We do come back to fractions later in the year where we find some of these things, fractions to do with numbers. So we've been thinking about what fractions are, but we might find out later in the year what 3/4 of a number is, rather than just understanding what 3/4. So, well done with your fraction work. We look forward to seeing the end of it in your stuff you may send in today. Just going to pause. Back tomorrow, it's new maths.